Hi, everybody. I'm Charles, for those of you who don't know me. And for those of you who do know me, you know that there's nothing quite like being cooped up inside thanks to a snowstorm to make me want to make a direct address video. Actually, it's a bit of a lie because I have been mulling over making this video for a while, but I thought this is the time to do it. So, what is filmmaking? Well, let's start with something that a pet peeve that I really have to get out of the way because it does structure a lot of what I'm going to say about filmmaking. And that is that video is not film. They are two different media. Now, I'll grant you that these days, much of what is called film was probably shot on video, was probably going to be released on video, but as a result of the development of film as a technology and video as a technology or set of technologies, they are not quite the same thing, which has resulted in different expectations that are related to film and video. I have a guest appearance by my cat. So, what is filmmaking? What is film? Well, in the broadest sense, it's anything based on motion media. And the popularization and distribution of production tools and editing have made filmmaking accessible to just about everybody. And this is more or less a long-term democratization of the medium that has been discussed for quite a while, including my early days in academia, that this is a big deal because originally movies were a big budget, big industry that involved lots of money, lots of technical resources and whatever, which is no longer true, obviously. So one of the consequences of the mass distribution of video and film production tools is that the very notion of a filmmaker has changed, because it used to be that if you said you were a filmmaker, the assumption would be that you make feature movies. Now, that certainly is still true, but I think it has because so many people now have made a film in the simple sense of, picking up their phone and shooting some video footage. The whole idea of a filmmaker being someone who only makes narrative features, that's no longer the case, because everyone now recognizes that there's a range of film or video expression that does not involve making a movie that's 2 hours long with a long story. It's TV commercials, it's YouTube videos, it's TikTok, it's all of these things are all film in this broad new definition of the medium. Now, to a certain extent, I think this is a generational question. People who have literally grown up with these tools. For someone of my generation, it took quite a while for people to get used to the idea that it's possible to make a movie outside of Hollywood or without Hollywood exhibition. So that in itself is liberating, but there are consequences. For example, film, literally film as a medium, is much more of an image-based medium than video. It doesn't have to be, but that's the way it has evolved. And that's because film, after all, started out silent. It also started off very expensive. So when the narrative feature evolved, eventually incorporated sound, by the time that it did, the idea of how to make a movie was shaped by all the techniques that they had evolved over a couple of decades to tell a story without sound. So as a result, the image has always been primary in movies. That's to say, what the traditional notion of film. Now, that's still the case, but it is not as much so. But the idea here is that even now, the idea of a narrative feature is that the story will be told at least largely by the images, supported by the sound, certainly supported by the dialogue, but that things will proceed through a series of images that are cut together. In video, on the other hand, video evolved as a technology when sound was already a given. And of course, it started off as a broadcast medium. And so the voice in particular, but sound in general, has always been much more important for video expression than it is in film. Now, one of the consequences of this is that there are certain expectations in both media that kind of conflict with each other. For example, mainstream narrative features are still largely third person. That's to say, you look at an image and listen to sound as if you are not really there, you're just experiencing it. As opposed to video, where the major form of communication is, of course, what we're doing right now, direct address. Let's say second person. And the reason that is the case is because the voice has taken on the primary source of expression. Much of the visual expression in video is experimental, or I should say decorative, in the sense that it doesn't have any immediate relationship to the message or narrative, if you will, that it would in cinema. So that's a big difference. And I bring this up because it is perfectly possible for someone to be a hugely successful video influencer who knows absolutely nothing about traditional filmmaking technique. In fact, I argue from what I've seen, that's true of most of them. That's not to say that they're badly produced. They don't have backup teams of skilled technicians. They have lots of people working for them, but conceptually, they are not thinking in the way that narrative filmmakers usually do, which is to say, thinking first of what are we looking at, who's looking, who's doing it, whatever, as opposed to in video where a lot can be wrapped up in the soundtrack, then plastered over the images. So a lot of video is really little more than illustrations as opposed to actual expression. I know that that's a loaded distinction and a lot of people would disagree, but I would insist that is a central difference. Again, it needn't be. There is no reason you cannot use video in for traditional cinematic expression, especially now when the image is so good that you could basically be shooting in film. But that doesn't matter. The point is that the idea that people have when they talk about filmmaking in the old-fashioned sense is now secondary to the video expression of people directly expressing themselves through the voice that is illustrated by images or video sequences that they mutually reinforce each other. So that's just a few thoughts about film versus video. And of course, obviously, I am a video maker as much as I am a filmmaker. But I make the distinction because when I refer to myself as a filmmaker, it's with the recognition that that means a very different thing depending on the person I'm talking to, particularly depending on their age, and that the old-fashioned ideas that I had to learn as a film student, for the most part, it's not that they're dead. It's not that people can't recognize the difference, but they no longer dominate. And overall, that is liberating, but there are costs. And I would insist that one of the costs is that a lot of filmmakers are losing the ability to work without sound. Now, sound is very important. I think it's obvious from all of my work that I view sound as very important. But if it becomes the major focus, then you're no longer talking about the classic idea of film, which starts with and continues to support primarily the image.